Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this bonnet called the Herringbone Bonnet. This is so much fun to make for new babies, and as you can see here I've got a variety of colors. So I'm going to take you along step by step and show you how to make the newborn size. And let's get started. To make our bonnet today, I'm going to be using this merino wool. This is from Sugar Bush Yarns, and I really like this particular yarn because it is beautiful and squishy. It is 100% wool. You can use any type of Aran weight or heavy worsted yarn. And I'm also starting with an I hook as well as an S hook, and I'm going to be using them for different things along the way. But for the most part, we're going to be using our larger hook. But to get started, you're going to make a slip knot and chain the required number of stitches. For the newborn size, I am going to be chaining 33. And then in our first row, we are going to be skipping one and ending up with an even number of stitches. So for this, I will end up with 32 stitches. It is important here that you don't make your chains too tight, and you want to make them, easy to work into as well. Speed a little bit, and now I should have the right number of chains. That's how it will look. That's the size it will be when we fold it in half for our bonnet size. That's what it'll look like. Now to go right into row number 1, we're going to skip our first chain, and we're going to half double crochet into every other chain. So as I mentioned before, this should leave us with an even number of stitches, just working a single stitch into each and every chain. There you go, you should be able to see better now. And if you see me doing any extra little motions with my hook, it is just because this particular yarn tends to split a little bit. But here we are with all of our first row done, and heading into chain 1 and turn. And this is where we really start making our pattern for our bonnet. So I'm going to start with a front post half double crochet, and I'm careful to work into the top of the stitch under the first 2 loops. This is very important for this particular design. The next stitch is a back post half double crochet, and you can see it's worked the same way. It's worked into the tops of the stitches under the first 2 loops. This is how every single one of these is done, and this is what creates the pattern that I use to name this bonnet the Herringbone Bonnet. We're going to repeat this pattern of front post half double crochet and then a back post half double crochet across the entire row, keeping in mind that sometimes when you work the very first or the very last stitches in these rows, it looks like you are working around the very edge. But the main thing is that your pattern is going to line up as we keep doing these rows, and that you end up with the right number of stitches. So I'm almost done with row number 2 here, ending with a back post half double crochet. Looking good so far. And double checking to make sure that I do have the right number. And now heading into row number 3, we're going to chain 1 and turn again. And in this row, we are going to be doing the same thing, but with the opposite order. So instead of starting with a front post half double crochet, you're going to want to start with a back post half double crochet. So again, working into the very end, I end up doing more of just a normal half double crochet here to get us started, but then we're going to go into a front post half double crochet and then a back post, and you're going to repeat that across the entire row. So this is going to have each of your stitches lining up with the opposite thing from the row before. So whenever you did whenever you have a front post from row 2, you should be doing a back post on top of it, and vice versa. We're just going to alternate them. So speed this up a little bit here. And when you are done with row 3, you have pretty much got the hang of the pattern that we're using for the entire body of this bonnet. In real time, each one of these, once you're familiar with the pattern, it takes an hour or maybe a little bit more than an hour for me to make one of these. So it's really a nice pattern to whip up for a quick gift. Now, as you can see here, we're done with row 3, and the rest of the body of the bonnet, the main part, is just repeating rows 2 and 3 for the width that you need for your size. So for the newborn bonnet, we only repeat these rows 2 more times. And so I repeated rows 2 and 3 2 more times to get this width. And it looks small, but keep in mind this is for a newborn, and this is just the main piece. Now we're going to start going into the shaping, which will give us the rest of the width. Now, if you are making the square version of the bonnet, you will simply repeat rows 2 and 3 one more time with no change. But if you are making a rounded version of the bonnet that has more of a classic shape and is going to be curved to the head a little bit more, this is when you're going to do this shaping that you'll see me do here. You start off the row by doing the same pattern for a certain number of stitches. So repeating your front post and back post stitches in the order that you need to keep the pattern going unbroken. So for the newborn size, I'm doing 8 stitches this way. And then when we get to the middle portion of the bonnet, we're going to be combining some stitches to decrease the total number we have in the row. I will be showing you 2 different ways that I've done this pattern before. One is the old way that I used to use all the time, and that you may see if you look closely in some of the pictures of this pattern online. And then the second way is how I like to do it now. So the first way that I've done this decrease is combining 2 stitches with a front post and a back post half double crochet together. And you can see that right there. That's how that turns out. And it basically looks like loops. But the way that I like to do it now, as you can see right here, is a front post double crochet that's not finished, and then you go right into a back post double crochet, and then you combine them together. So it's basically like double crochet 2 together, but one of them is a front post and one of them is a back post. I'm going to do 8 sets of these, meaning that I'm going to take the next 16 stitches in the bonnet, and they're going to be combined into just 8 stitches. And this will give the shaping that we need in the very middle section of the top of the bonnet. I like doing it this way because it preserves that ribbed look in the pattern just a little bit better. And overall, I think that it looks better in the finished product. So we're just going to take a minute and finish these decreases. Right there. And that should be good. So what you should be left with now are just 8 stitches left. So this decreasing section is right in the middle. And now I'm going to finish the row by doing front post and back post half double crochets the way we started the row. to finish it off. And when we're done, you should be able to see the top of the bonnet starting to curve in a little bit, right there. And we fold it in half like it will be in our finished project. You can see it's starting to curve a little bit at the back. But our second row of decreases is really going to make the big difference here. So to do the second row of decreasing, we chain one and turn, and you're still going to do your normal pattern of front post and back posts for the first 8 stitches. So those side sections stay exactly the same. Except in this row, you're doing them in the opposite order as before, just like the rest of the pattern goes, where you have a front post. In the previous row, you're doing a back post and vice versa. Now, when you get to the middle section where you did decreases before, you're going to do the exact same thing with combining a front post stitch and a back post stitch as you would do a double crochet two together. The only difference is that now you have fewer stitches in that section, so you're only going to do 4 sets of these. And so the 8 stitches that you're left with from the previous round, they get combined even further into just 4 stitches when you're done with this row. All right, that goes pretty quickly there. And then to finish this second decreasing row, you're simply going to do those 8 final stitches in the normal pattern again. So I'll speed that up. When you are done with these 2 rows, the whole body of the bonnet is done, and it should be looking a lot more like a bonnet. Our next step is to seam up the back. So without cutting the yarn, you fold the bonnet in half, and you are simply going to want to do slip stitches just like this to bind the 2 sides together. So just going under the tops of those stitches there at the edge and slip stitching each one, making sure not to make it too tight. And this will finish off the back very well, and by seaming right under the tops of the stitches there, the seam is not too thick on the inside, so it should be pretty comfortable for your little one. But you're just going to want to continue that all the way up the back right to what was the middle of our rows before. And when you are satisfied with the way you've bound up the very last one, you can cut the yarn at that point and bind off that last stitch. Now, if you are making a square bonnet and you do this, I suggest leaving that tail nice and long because you can use it to attach a pom-pom. But I won't be doing that in this video since I am making a rounded version. But that's just a little tip for you. All right, and this is what it looks like so far from the right side. Coming along very nicely. So the next step is to now grab our smaller hook, which I am using an F hook. Honestly, you could use a bigger hook. You can even use the same size hook, but using a smaller hook gives you nice shaping as your stitches will end up smaller here. So I'm starting at a corner, one of the corners of the bonnets, it doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to add my yarn and chain 1. The first round that you're going to do around the entire edge of the bonnet is just single crochet. We're going to set up a foundation to do our ribbing on so that we can create the final shaping that's going to really make this bonnet fit well. And so as you can see, I am just doing about 2 stitches, an average of 2 stitches for every row of half double crochet that I'm going across, but there's no exact number. It is simply whatever your gauge seems to work well with, and whatever looks like it is just slightly pulling in as you go around. So what I mean by that is it looks like your round of stitches here is starting to create that shaping. So you may want to play around with your stitch placement a little bit here, or even the size of hook you want to use. But the idea is to go around both sides of the bonnet, if you will, around the neck area and around the face side. And when you get to the corners here, like I am right here, you're going to simply put 3 stitches in the corner. And that is the only special thing you need to do. So now on this side, where I'm not going around the edge of my rounds, I am just doing 1 stitch for every stitch of this edge. You can work them into the bottom of the stitches like I'm doing right now. You can work them in between the stitches. Since it's going the opposite direction, you can do this part however you want. But it might be a little bit easier since you already have a stitch count ready. And you're just doing 1 stitch per stitch. But you will still see that your stitches are going to be pulled in. They're going to look tighter now because you are using a smaller hook. So again, at the corner, we're just doing 3 stitches, and even though you couldn't really see a difference, that is where I started the round. And so I just slip stitched it to close it. Okay, so it's looking good so far. It might look a little bit strange just for this one part because it's gathering your work in so much around the edge, but the ribbing will make that look a little bit more natural. So to start the first row of ribbing around the bottom, you simply chain 1, and then around your single crochet stitches, you're going to make a pattern of front post and back post half double crochets. So this is very similar to what we did in the body of the bonnet, except for our ribbing, we are going to actually line up the front post stitches and the back post stitches across the rows so that it actually looks like ribbing. You're going to do front post and back post, just 1 of each in a repeating pattern all the way around the opening. But for the corner stitches, we are again going to just do 3 stitches in that 1 corner stitch. And then you just continue with your 1 front post and your 1 back post. Okay, so you're going to do this all the way around, and make sure you see where your middle stitch is in the corner because that's going to be important in our second row of ribbing. But most of this is very straightforward, and when you get around to where you started, you are simply going to slip stitch and close the round. So I will speed this up some right here. All right, so here we are at the corner. And once again, I'm just going to add 3 stitches in the corner. And at this point, we're pretty close to where this round started. So looking at where it starts and where that first front post stitch is, you can plan backwards for those last couple of stitches. As you can see, I go ahead and do a back post stitch right after the corner because that's how it's going to line up nicely for me. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to do my second round of ribbing, really paying attention to the corners here because this is where we're going to add our ties. So we start with a chain 1, and at this point I'm just going to line up my front post and back post stitches so that the front post stitches go on top of front post stitches from the round before, and same with the back post stitches. We're going to do this all the way around. Now, if you're doing a larger size, you may have more than 2 rounds of ribbing. So what's happening here when we add our ties, this is just what you do in your last round of ribbing. So once you get all the way around to the corner, as I've done, I did skip a little bit, I'm going to be putting one stitch into the corner, and then the next one, which is the middle stitch. This is the very middle stitch of the corner. And from there, you're going to chain out many stitches to make the length of your tie. I think for this bonnet, I did 35 stitches. Somewhere between 30 and 40 is typically good because this is how long the ties are going to be. Except when we're done with them, they're going to be a little bit shorter because of how we complete them. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so this number of stitches looks good. It looks a little long, but as I'm going to show you, it's going to look shorter when we're done. So what we do is when you get to the end of your chain, you're simply going to reach back through each stitch and slip stitch it. So here I'm reaching through, yarning over, coming back through, and slip stitching. You're going to do this all the way back to the main piece of the bonnet, and this creates a nice thicker tie that is soft and almost looks like an I-cord. And this is honestly my favorite way to make ties or crochet cords of any kind. Just doing each one just the same. It is definitely worthwhile to take your time for this step so that all your stitches look really consistent. Since these ties are going to be very visible and they're going to stand basically by themselves, it's worthwhile to take your time. So it does take a little while. I'm going to speed this process up and show you how I like to do this part when we get back to the main part of the bonnet. Okay, once you've slip stitched the last stitch of that tie, I yarn over and I kind of work through the last middle stitch that we did to do the last corner stitch, that is, because when you draw the yarn through all of the loops, as you can see right there, it makes that corner piece really strong. So what you should be left with is 3 stitches in your corner with that tie that we just created with chain stitches and slip stitches. That should be coming out of the very middle of your corner. Okay, that's one tie. When you get to the other corner, just before you finish the round, you're going to create the second tie. And in between, you're just doing your ribbing. So as you can see here, I'm reaching through and slip stitching to finish this round. And this finishes the ribbing and creating the ties, which means the bonnet is basically finished. You can bind it off right here, and you are simply left with some ties or some ends to weave in, which you'll see me doing here. I like to use a tapestry needle for this step. You can use your smaller hook if you want to as well, but I like to use a tapestry needle. And what's nice about this design is if you're making it with a solid color, there are only 4 or 5 ends, I think, to weave in. So it's not very much at all. It only takes a minute. But if you are adding a pom-pom on the back of the bonnet, you can go ahead and make your pom-pom or use it or grab it, and you can use that end that we had from seaming up the back to sew it on. And so that's kind of a neat little trick that I like to do there. But regardless of which one you're doing, when you finish weaving in your ends and trimming them off, you're done. So here's how it looks when it's all completed. Looks very, very cute. And it's ready for whatever sweet baby you're making it for. And there you have it. Here's a bonnet on my little model, and as you can see, it fits the head really well on both sides and looks super cute.
Thanks for joining me to make this pattern. Bye!